I have a lot to say, but I won't say it. I was there in the 90s, and I saw the old system fall apart, and I saw the sort of chaos that replaced it. And anyway, my question is, there are links between what's going on in Mongolia and what's going on in the world and what's going on in the United States. Can anyone pinpoint that link? So how is this all connected as one international global problem? The problem of democracy for Mongolia, the problem of democracy for the United States. When I was in Mongolia in 1992, America was a completely different thing then than it is now. So what's happened to the world in this 24-year period, or whatever it is?
Whoever feels motivated, take on the question.
Okay, maybe I will start saying my views, and of course other panelists are welcome to comment their own judgments. But I think it is a start of globalization last 2 decades, which really made no boundaries between the people. And that's actually a very good process. Of course, it is a difficult process because it wasn't there before. It's something, a new state, new situation. And especially it has its own, so to say, tools, like internet, which really changes everything. But I think now the idea is, now it has to lead also to transformation. As we passed the time where we are young and the children's age, but now the globalized world is reaching the stage with all these conflicts or disputes and issues confronting, and after also dealing with some setbacks, that would be a very important lesson that we, as it's called, the democratization, but it is at the very end, making the political processes flat throughout all the world, Therefore, you don't see, there are different economic levels maybe of any country, also cultural levels, but generally public and organizational and governmental political process, it is really the same as you are in Mongolia or United States or anywhere else. That's, I see a great chance to have a new stage of development in our world.
Okay. I'd also like to tackle Brian's question there. Again, turning to Berkeley in the 1960s, which I mentioned was the mother of all demonstrations, it was related to demonstrations going on in other parts of the country and in France and other countries of the world. The democracy's children were turning against it. I think that, as we heard today, the youth of these countries were very active in these demonstrations and democratic movements. So it was kind of a rite. It has been a kind of rite of passage, in one sense. Another aspect has been a demographic explosion of young people who are disappointed, frustrated with the stagnation of institutions to deal with problems that they see. Yes, the 1960s demonstrations were the result of frustration with the Vietnam War, but they also addressed larger issues of democracy and the failures of those who ran the institutions. And I think that the Chinese, the Korean, the Mongolian demonstrations had some relationship, or at least they saw precedents, and they saw how these demonstrations could be effective, rather than just blindly lashing out against the authorities. They were organized and sometimes mostly peaceful, restrained, and I think that these were seen as perhaps creative innovations in the way democracies should be run. As Thomas Jefferson wrote that that revolutions must occur once every generation. Perhaps that has become an unanticipated consequence or unanticipated necessity of modern democracies, that they must be renewed, and the actual renewal of democracy may be messy, but still necessary. Thank you.
Hello, my name is Balar. I'm a graduate student at USF. Thank you all for the presenters and the visitors from Mongolia. My question goes directly to Mr. Fish and then the current parliament member, Mr. Bald, and perhaps Batchimeg can answer too. You bring a good point by highlighting the importance of constitutional reform and specifically highlighting the president's ruling will not benefit Mongolia as a better governance. But I thought that the constitutional reform was going to rebalance the power between government and its agencies. So I would like to hear more explanation from Mr. Bald and Mrs. Batchimeg, since they're the expert in the field. Thank you.
Thank you, Balar, for your excellent question, and also I thank Dr. Fish for your comments. And taking this opportunity, I also really would like to thank Dr. Fish for his interest for Mongolia. And I think, if I'm not mistaken, you've written first article on Mongolia almost 20 years back now. Yeah, that was very interesting article about Mongolia's democratization and democracy. And the name was Democracy in Unlikely Place. Democracy without prejudice. Yes, very good. That time I was really interested to read your opinion at that time. And again, I also read your last article, I think about a month ago. It was also excellent piece. And thank you for commenting on our ongoing institutional amendment process.
Please feel free to address what you brought up about it, either now or later.
Okay. Yes, this in Mongolia, now one of the really hot topics is now the constitutional amendment issue. Because government recently established independent working group officially. I'm a member of that group too. We just ended that first part of our work. And there is also parliamentary working group on constitutional amendment. And even there is ongoing discussion about having referendum together with the presidential election voting in late June. So perhaps, I think there is 50% of possibility to have this amendment before the July of this year. But I only can say 50%, half-half, because politics is not always not that very much predictable. So we don't know what will happen for the next 2-3 months, and people have different opinions and positions on that issue. I think, I assume that Mr. Bolt also will say slightly different opinion than me, but we have a lot of common position on the issue too. But let me highlight that when we discuss about constitutional amendment, I think almost there is no discussion about giving more power to the president. It's about strengthening our parliamentary system. We are considering to give more power to our prime minister, its usual parliamentary state. Why we think about this? Because there are two chronic problems in our government system. now. One is accountability. The second one is too much polarization, politicization in the government system. Now, these two have been diverting too much time and energy from the people and from the politicians, from the government. Otherwise, it could be diverted into much productive economic growth and well-being of our people. So, when recently I'm having a lot of discussions with our people as a member of this government working group. I ask people when we're meeting a lot of people in full office, who is the leader of Russia? They would say Putin. Who is the leader of China? Xi Jinping. Okay, no problem. Who's the leader of Japan and Germany? People answer without thinking. Just say that. Who is the leader of Mongolia? Can you tell? Who's the
No,
leader
and
of
I
Mongolia?
celebrate the fact that I can't tell you that.
Some people would say, okay, this is president. Others would say speaker. Someone else would say it is prime minister. Even people would say, okay, we have 76 prime ministers in our country. Because I just mentioned during my talk that because parliament is holding the most important, you're part of the executive power. No one is responsible in Mongolia for appointing bad, okay? In terms of perhaps, in terms of its his or her ethics or professional capacity. No one is responsible for appointing this bad minister in Mongolia because 76 members of the parliament appoint ministers. 76 members allocate the budget. No one is, takes responsibility of this growing budget deficit in Mongolia and growing national debt. So this is accountability problem. So we have to shift this power from parliament to prime minister. Actually, this is going to strengthen our parliamentary system, making our parliamentary system more like Germany and other normal parliamentary states. But I agree with you that shifting power from parliament to executives, there is danger, especially for young democracy like Mongolia. So I've been quite vocal, saying that really at the same time, it's all about check and balances. So at the same time we shift power from parliament to prime minister, it's time for us to think seriously about strengthening parliament's investigative power. Parliament should be powerful enough to hold cabinet and prime minister. They are responsible. So I don't think that the constitution is giving enough power to the parliament in this sense. So we have to think more about balancing, check more about accountability. Okay?
Thank you.
A lot of the constitutional changes that you discussed are something I would be in favor of. But I do want to warn that lurking underneath this desire to give the executive more power, oftentimes, this is often coupled, virtually every other country I've studied, with a kind of drive to give the president more power. And if you're just transferring power to the government, to the prime minister from parliament, that's okay, although obviously prime ministerial dictatorships, the type we see in Singapore or in Malaysia, and in Hungary as well, can be a big danger as well. But you guys are already aware of that. I think the biggest danger is transferring power to the presidency. And fortunately, the current reforms you're considering are not mostly about that. They're mostly about empowering the prime minister and simultaneously, also as you point out, empowering the parliament's investigative powers vis-a-vis the government. This is all potentially really good stuff. But in conversations with Mongolians, I hear again and again this resort to maybe what we need is a stronger president. So I worry that this kind of tendency to try to executivize power could end up 2 years from now, 3 years from now, becoming, especially if you get a popular president, like in 2017, that this could end up being, well, the stronger prime minister's working, let's just get it over with and have a nice presidential system, and then people often say, like you have in America, but we don't have a strong presidential system in America. We have a presidential system, but the president is very much hemmed in by parliament, as everybody here knows, but not everybody in Mongolia or anywhere, a lot of places I study in the world know. So, but it's actually anti-presidentialism that I'm preaching, not anti-parliament, not having a stronger prime minister. At the same time, the question you raise about who is the leader of Mongolia, I can understand it's great to be able to point to one person and say that person is responsible. On the other hand, I've always kind of liked the fact and celebrated the fact that I can't tell you who the leader of Mongolia is. This is the Speaker of Parliament, the Prime Minister, the President. I think, a lot of successful democracies through history have been like that. The President has certain powers as the head of state, the Prime Minister has others, Parliament has others still. I wouldn't let the drive to be able to tell the world who the leader is underlie this discussion at all, because, if it's true, you can say who's in charge of China, Xi Jinping. You can say who's in charge of Russia, Vladimir Putin. But I don't think you want a Xi or a Putin in Mongolia. That would be the only thing I want to say here.
Sorry, but at the same time, people can tell who is the leader of Germany, it's Merkel, who is the leader of Japan's parliament.
Absolutely, and they have responsibility. I totally agree. No, I totally agree, and I do not disfavor the kind of the kind of constitutional arrangements that are under consideration here. I would just warn that, given what I've heard in conversation for 20 years in Mongolia, that there is this kind of thirst to get on with it and just have a nice presidential system like a lot of other countries have. That's what I'm warning against. But a lot of the revisions you're talking about now are something that I would certainly support.
Yeah, I just want to add that, because in this parliament we have now only 2 members who has been drafting and adapting the Constitution 1992. It's myself and another member from People's Party. And it means that protectors of the Constitution, the numbers is decreased a lot. In the last parliament we have been 8 people, and we formed a working group analyzing what could be the constitutional amendments look like. And we elaborated some possible amendment, but at the very end it's true. It went, the last goal was to shift more power to president or to prime minister. At this point, I withdrawn my membership in the working group, and then this working group could not succeed to submit the constitutional changes, amendments, drafts. But why I did that? Because there was only one time change of the Constitution in 1999, and I was part of this process. And until now, I really regret being part of this very wrong development, which really damaged our political system, made a step back from overall democratic process in Mongolia. And any change we make today, I see the danger to get even more damage. Because right now, our society and our political elite very damaged, very sick. And sick people produce sick decisions. Therefore, I see that, people say so many governments, 20 more years. But at the same time, in 27 years, we never dissolved the parliament. I see that the greatest political stability we could achieve. That means the people could rely on a political structure which is stable, which is powerful, which is not depending on a single person or single group of interest, and which can carry out the general policies. And people say, as Batchimeg says, now you cannot identify who is leading the country. Yes, that's the question, but whether that's the crucial question, whether that's something, we need one person to rely on and give all the fate of Mongolia to, on one hand, I really doubt, the unpredictability of our political system, it has maybe one of the great strengths being between these two giant countries. If you know there is only one person who is ruling, who is controlling, who is taking the full hostage, the whole country and whole system of Mongolia, which dangers could that produce? Nobody can predict it today. Therefore, I am still very reluctant, and I am still one of those forces who is driving against the constitutional amendments. Of course, step by step, the ruling party succeeding with some process. They're taking American example. They took this Stanford developed program, how it called, deliberative democracy. Now they have passed the law. During we had the internal party struggles, the majority passed a new law on this deliberative democracy. I thought this process would be something like, should we build this road or this bridge, ask the people's opinions, or which subjects include for our children in the school and so on. But now this body is replacing Parliament in deciding which amendment should be voted in a national referendum, bypassing the Parliament. I don't think that the constitutional reform is something you can ask some 1,000 people chosen by a computer. Because behind this is a political force, behind this is government which is interested to get more power. So it means just ordinary 1,000 people who have absolutely no powers representing people, they can be influenced. That they can make mistakes because they can really be taken into different positions. Therefore, I really doubt. And on 29th of this month, I will be one of the speakers for this. I don't know how to call it. There will be a conference, kind of conference, deciding on forums on the definitions. What should be given to these chosen participants. So of course I will speak up and try to stop this process, but I don't know whether we can succeed. But I see the real great danger, and we should really think about it again and again.
Could I just say a couple of words here? In discussing democracy in Mongolia, we're really talking about democracy in general. And I think one thing that has been overlooked by focusing on the central government, the centralization of politics in Mongolia, is the contribution that federalism often makes to preserving democracy, counterbalancing whether it's a strong president or a strong parliament. Not necessarily, this may not be practical in Mongolia with 60% of the population living in Ulaanbaatar. But strengthening local government and empowering local government, not only as a means of balancing against the central government, whether it's Japan or Germany, but also as a way of educating or recruiting politicians for the next generation, local politics, then regional politics, and then central politics. In the long run, I think that there must be a dispersal of power, and I think Professor Fish would agree that this is really what we want in a democracy. Not the concentration of power in any one person, but more of the dispersal so that there is this anonymity of leadership. Thank you.
I have a question here. This question is to Professor Fish and all the political scientists from Mongolia. A couple of years ago, a question about mining, how it can be dangerous to also democracy in Mongolia, given to other different cases that you studied. So, and today we heard a point that Batchimeg raised about economic failure being not precisely economic, but it's political also. So could any of you comment on this, how economy, mining, and all the situation with political?
Well, the word resource curse is quite well known internationally, and especially in the resource-rich countries. And many international experts, people who have learned lessons from other similar resource-rich countries, have been advising Mongolians just at the beginning of this economic boom that the resource curse could be a real problem for Mongolia. But human beings like that, you can hear a lot of good best practices and lessons learned, but unless you've been through by yourself, through this experience, it seems that people are not good at taking lessons and learning from others. Mongolia has been experiencing all these problems by its own, but this not necessarily a bad thing, I think. We are learning from our own mistakes and failures. It's a very rich country, with only 3 million people, and our market is just next to our door, China, and Mongolia can be, and people of Mongolia can be rich, very rich, if governance is good, perhaps in 1 or 2 decades. But the problem, why, I personally in favor of constitutional amendment, and I think public service reform is very, very important. The reason is that I think in order to avoid next resource curse and repeating economic difficulties and problems, we should really work on our governance and institution building. Without having good accountability system and check and balance, the system of power, among powers in the constitution, it's going to be very hard for us. Because I just mentioned why I'm asking about who is the leader in Mongolia. There should be one person in charge for the country. Okay, China and Russia could not, perhaps it's not a good example because the political system is different. But like in Germany, in Japan, in other parliamentary countries, we know there is one person in charge. Okay, the accountability system is there. But in Mongolia, really, now I was a member of parliament. I really didn't want to vote for appointing when we were appointing ministers. It was my thought that it's not good that I appoint this minister because I will not take responsibility. I don't know about this person. I don't know what could be the performance of this person. And it was really not good for me to participating in the allocation of budget. That was my personal experience. So in order to prevent next repeated resource curse, it's very good to have good accountability system in the country, and it would be good to the professional public servants, they have more, they can be less politicized, they can be less polarized, they can think in a more professional way. If you have this professional public service, then we can avoid next resource curse. Otherwise, it's a rich country, and investors, even if the countries, the people are not in a good situation, investors will come to Mongolia because there is market over there, there is resource in the country. So still, there are a lot of opportunities of growth. So we really need to utilize these opportunities for the well-being of our people. That we need good governance and good accountability system.
I agree with everything that Ms. Batchimeg just said. It seems to me like the problem with the resource curse is there's, half a dozen things that it can actually, half a dozen problems it can inflict on democracy. And people who've studied the oil curse in particular point this out. And I should say, just parenthetically, that oil seems to be uniquely poisonous. The kind of natural resources that Mongolia has actually do not always undermine the prospects for democracy. They haven't in Chile, they didn't in Botswana. There's something about fluid, about hydrocarbons, about something that you get out of the ground that's actually liquid. I think it's just the super profits that accrue to it and how easy it is to get out of the ground that have something to do with it. But the kind of mineral resources and precious metals and coal that Mongolia has a lot of right now don't necessarily undermine democracy as badly as oil does. We still don't know why that's the case. But looking at oil-based countries, there are a bunch of reasons why democratization tends to be endangered by a large surplus of natural resources. One is the so-called rentier effect, where the government can afford to just buy everybody off, right? But you're not going to get that in Mongolia. You don't have enough resource wealth per capita for the government to do what it does in Qatar or Kuwait, right? Where it just kind of cuts everybody a check for $50,000 and lets them put a down payment on an apartment when they turn 18. That's not going to happen in Mongolia. There's also the truncated modernization effect, which is where all of the economy just becomes kind of completely truncated by its development, truncated by oil. That's not going to happen in Mongolia either. It's already, in some sense, an industrialized country. It industrialized under the Soviet model. That's not going to be a problem. There's the repression effect, where the government has all this slack resources to fund an especially sophisticated and large coercive apparatus. As long as Mongolia is at least partially democratic, that won't be a problem either. I think the biggest problem is the corruption effect. There's just so much to steal when there's that much mineral wealth there. It's so easy for parliamentarians and civil servants to take hundreds of thousands of dollars just for looking the other way from a Russian or an American or a Canadian or a Korean mining interest that comes in so easily. That's the problem. And my concern is that elites become less interested in transparency and in democracy when they have more to hide, and that ordinary people feel more disgruntled by their democratic system and more likely to say, as Russians did in the late 90s and the beginning of the century, well, if this is what democracy gets us, to hell with it. So I think that the key here is accountability, and I'm really heartened by what Ms. Batchimeg said about the importance of empowering the parliament to investigate the executive branch. If the prime minister and the government are going to get more power vis-a-vis parliament, it's absolutely crucial that the parliament be able to investigate the executive, that its powers, which are already there in the Constitution thanks to its drafters, right, to investigate and interpolate members of the government are strengthened. That's absolutely key. I would also say that it's key that they be able to investigate the civil service, because while I agree with Ms. Batchimeg that having a professional civil service that's detached from politics can be a very good thing, obviously civil service can be corrupted as well. In fact, sometimes it's easier to corrupt them. You certainly see this in a lot of other post-communist countries, that it's as easy at least as corrupting parliamentarians, because there's not much of a spotlight on civil servants. So the parliament is going to need investigative powers vis-a-vis the civil service as well, if the resource curse will be averted. And I think it can be averted in Mongolia. It's going to be very challenging. Mongolia and Ghana are the two new democracies in the world where we see this. Ghana also had about 15 years of experience with democracy, democratized at the same time Mongolia did in the early 1990s. Then they struck oil. I mean, they had it before, but in the previous decade, they really started developing these resources. Now Ghana's become an oil exporter. Can it maintain what is by far West Africa's most impressive case of democratization? I think the answer to that question is crucial to democracy internationally. Can Mongolia maintain its forward progress on democracy and consolidate its democracy despite this surplus of mineral wealth? That's equally important, I think.
Yeah, just to add that the biggest threat, because of the resource curse, I see it is a threat to democracy. At one point, Mongolia will lose its democracy when this income gap. Right now you see the mid-sized mines, deposits in private hands, already creating a big gap in income. But if private people only a small group of people or companies will get into ownership of the strategic, this huge world-class deposit that will again make Mongolia's system very fragile. Therefore, in my first term in government, I worked as a chairman of the Mineral and Petroleum Authority for 4 years. And I saw this problem, visited many countries. I saw this threat. Therefore, we developed a kind of mechanism which can prevent this development. And the program we called that time the Rich Mongolia. And then we passed the law. That was my election program, and supported by people. And then we passed the law creating the state-owned company, Emeritus Mongolia, which owned all the strategic deposits and continue. But at the same time, it is again on the few people who are in power who is executing all the powers over these huge deposits and huge projects. Therefore, we're still considering how to proceed. The first step we already made, distributing from one big coal mine, more than 1,000 shares to each citizen of Mongolia. Because we are only 3 million, and calculating all these wells, it is possible, making more share, more participation and more control by broad public for this mineral development. I think that's still on the agenda, which we should consider, even especially today where the prices went down and there is not such a big opposition. When income high, prices high, then it was really hard to get through. But I think today we had this chance to resolve for the long term that there will be no big income gap in the future, which would make our overall system very fragile.
Yeah, I have a question which takes us down from what necessarily is kind of an elite conversation when you're talking about democracy and parliamentary systems and so on. But when Mongolia began to emerge out of the Soviet period, it looked very different, and you did not have 60% of the population living in Ulaanbaatar, and you didn't have, and what you have now is, I don't know what the percentage, but the percent of people who live in the Ger, the informal settlements around the city, is enormous. And you also have a huge amount of air pollution, and the quality of life has really declined a lot for people, and yet people want to have their children go to school, they try to find a job in the city. So you're increasingly, facing all these really serious social, environmental, and so on kinds of problems. And I just wonder, to what extent is democracy threatened by the inability of the government to keep pace with the kind of needs that people have literally on the ground that really make the quality of life very difficult. And I just recently learned that there's a very high suicide rate, much higher than I expected to hear. And it's higher among men than women, but I think it's just an indication that there are really severe concerns about the quality of life for people and the challenges that the municipal and the federal government, the state government have in dealing with, the kind of pace of urbanization that's taking place.
Yeah, it's again here. It's difficult, to resolve. It is an issue that, depending on the income, it will take its time. We cannot do it because the new democracy system allows to people move freely around. So we have this huge concentration around Ulaanbaatar, which caused really a lot of all these today's problems, which will also threaten the overall political system because it's very unstable. If something happens like 2008, today it will be even more difficult to resolve it. Therefore, one of the solutions we were proposing is it's enabling the people having more income and more property. And 1996, when we came to power, Democratic Party, we came the idea that all the apartments were given to the families for free. And that created a huge property market. That created thousands of young people go abroad to study, because sell the apartment, you can study. You know? So therefore, the United States will become crowded with young Mongolians. You know, that beginning from that time. I think that this kind of measures which enable broad masses of people getting into the market economy. You know? And another opportunity we see, because Mongolia is a huge country, you know, it's 5 times Germany, only 3 million people. And we have a law that every citizen is entitled to get some plot of land for free, but only 10% have got. So 90% is still outside of this right, which is given to everyone by law. So to implement this law would mean, because there is no land in Ulaanbaatar, so it means you can even give a larger portion of land elsewhere, and also more benefits. Then some process which would really make a huge revolution, because all this land would become also the huge market developments because of future. This is some kind of programs we should aim, you know. And there are also other opportunities, you know, to address the issue. Anyone has other ideas?
But Mongolia has been through huge and abrupt changes since 1990s. We had political, economic, and social changes because of this democratic revolution and new constitution, and also huge cultural change of way of life. Our ancestors are nomadic. We have been like my grandfathers and grandmothers were also nomadic. And less than 30% of population were living in Ulaanbaatar, in urban area, just 20, 30 some years ago. But now more than 75% of the people are living in settled areas. In Ulaanbaatar and other smaller cities around the country, only around about 25% of the population are still keeping nomadic way of life. So this urbanization, as you said, creates a lot of challenges and problems to Mongolia. Because over-concentration in Ulaanbaatar is the number one problem for the people who reside in Ulaanbaatar. But not only the environmental degradation and air pollution, all these problems, also the change of way of life. For the people who lived in the countryside, living very freely, less pressure of time, working very closely together with their community in a very calm and peaceful way. Now, suddenly, all of a sudden, just about a few years, they are in the city, very polluted. This city, it's huge pressure for individual. So I think, except for the good governance and economic growth, Mongolians need time, I believe. We need some time to learn to live in cities, to learn to plan the city, to learn to build construction infrastructure in cities. We have a lot to learn, perhaps we need some time. But we, of course, should not just rely to time. Okay, the reason we are talking about good governance is, I think, closely related with that. And we need really rapid growth of our economy. And only with this quick growth and better income, we can resolve all this overloaded problem within a short period of time, helping our people.
So I totally agree with the Fish. I said, okay, so Parliament is like a safeguard for democracy, Parliament is a safeguard for Mongolian cases sovereignty. We feel like two big powers. But we also need to identify it's a problem. If it's not checked by the institutions, and if it's overridden by proper interests, those interests were not checked, then it's like the people in the parliament just want to keep that at the same time, just keep the gameplay, let them know the policy won't have time to at least like a lie or lead and test it out. So I think the main thing we're here kind of missing out is why you're not giving instead of members to be a constitutional guard, why not the constitutional court could be checking institutions of the constitutions? And why not we're talking about giving more freedom to judiciary and have independent judiciary can check both politicians and parliamentarians? But there's, in my guess, there's a very strong tendency and temptation to parliament when there's a wealth period. So they want to keep the game in quite unaccountable way. So that's kind of the Mongolian problem, which also goes like, if you cannot check the corruption, then things will go wrong.
No one can check this powerful.
Can I ask a question to my Mongolian colleagues? Land reform has been a very important part of the transformation of Mongolia. And here we seem to have a kind of law of unintended consequences. I remember in reading about the land situation in Mongolia that there was fear, number one, with privatization of land, there would be fencing. And that certainly has occurred. If you fly out of UB, you see lots of fences. And this has a certain inhibiting effect on the nomadic lifestyle, that is, cannot move herds. As a tourist in Terelj, I could not hike across the open steppe as I once could. The second thing is that by privatizing land, one creates a market for land. Certainly it helps in capitalization of enterprises, but also, unless done very carefully, there are land-hungry neighbors to the south, and certainly through friends or dummy corporations, Chinese, Russians, Americans, Koreans can buy up land, and pretty soon there is a sizable foreign ownership of land. I wonder if this has occurred or not since the privatization of land in Mongolia.
Well, you speak like one of our NGO members, you know. Because I think there's enough land, you know. What we need to open up the market and start doing things, you know, start enabling our people being part of the market economy. Otherwise, if they feel marginalized, we have the big threat to the overall democratic system, overall existence of Mongolia. Of course, there are issues we have to address, we have to check, we have to really ensure that our sovereignty, our interests are not damaged. And there are restrictions for foreigners to own land. You know. Or they only can have a temporary use land. And ownership is only applied to Mongolian citizens. And they only once receive the land for free. And then after it is just a normal market like everywhere. And that would really expand. We want the surroundings of UB like Teresa and so on, open up a new tourism destinations, open up new land developments. And of course, the nomadic interests will be and should be considered. But if you want to feed people who are already settled, more than 70% of the population, you should find the balance of interest in order to enable that. You know. Otherwise, just enabling the nomads, growing the livestock. We dreamed of 20 million, now we have 70 million. You know. That's some development we have also to control. You know. That's something which we will address coming years.
For our guest from Mongolia is what has the government been doing or not to address problems of environmental degradation, but especially air pollution? And the comment goes back to the dangers for democracy. If there's a perception that the government is ignoring this problem or is incompetent or is perhaps corrupt and as a result is not dealing with it, that can be problematic. We know there's been protests recently, and then the contrast, of course, is with China, which also has terrible problems with pollution, but there's a perception based on a reality that the government is taking the problem very seriously and has been taking very concrete and somewhat effective steps to address the problem. So the question is, if there's a perception in Mongolia that an authoritarian state like that in China can do a better job of addressing issues like that, what does that mean for democracy in Mongolia?
Especially a democratic country can address and can resolve the issues better than a country where it's centralized control. You know. That's my belief. Last 4 years, when our government was in place, we built more roads than in the last 70 years. We showed it is possible. If you build infrastructure, then it is the main condition for decentralization. Now the movement towards UB is considerably weakened. You know, you see that today, the evidence. I think this process should continue, and giving the property, giving the business opportunity, reducing the taxes and special benefits, and then building infrastructure. That's all government should do, you know. And then also that would resolve all this air pollution and every other issue we have today. It's all interconnected. All these districts, you know, there's pollution, not only air pollution, but also the traffic jams and the social issues and poverty, unemployment, crime, everything interconnected. And we know the enemy, and we have to fight it. Not as before, just telling and just the slogans, you know, just the best wishes, but to do the right thing for the people. You know. That's our belief. You know.
Adding to what Mr. Bolt just said, that yes, of course, government has been taking a lot of measures, you know, to tackle all these issues. Of course, building infrastructures, implementing housing projects, and also distributing less smoke, stoves, etc. Many. But it's very hard to catch up the speed of urbanization compared to the resource that government has, and also especially I mentioned in my presentation that the political instability and also inefficiency of government institutions. So we have to continually work on that. Of course, democratic government should be responsible for their people. So that's the truth, but the capacity is
Who's moderating now?
So that's why we, again, you know,
Someone should take the lead.
repeatedly talking about good
I think
governance.
our last question maybe. Yeah?
Efficient governance in Mongolia, and tackling corruption.
We're on our own.
You know, holding
Anarchy.
in check the people in power. All these are very crucial for addressing these problems. Otherwise, you know, our population is not that big. We have enough land. If you have sound policy and also good governance capacity, I think we have, you know, all this opportunity to address these problems. So we really need to work for that. But the system change, political change, the reform, transparency, all the quality of good governance is the necessary factors for addressing these problems.